The rope was already around her neck when the stranger rode into Caldwell Flat. Maren Vail had not screamed. She had decided that much, somewhere between the moment they dragged her from the jailhouse and the moment they stood her up on the back of a grain wagon with the morning sun cutting hard across her face. She would not give them the satisfaction. She stood with her wrists bound behind her, her worn, rust-colored skirt catching the dry wind, her storm-grey eyes fixed on some point past the gathered crowd, past the faces she had known for 3 years, past the men who had eaten at her table and bought flour from her husband's store, and who now watched her with the flat, patient expressions of people who had already decided what she was. She was a murderer, they said. She had poisoned Edmund Vail, her husband of 4 years, in his sleep. She had not. But Caldwell Flat was the kind of town that made up its mind quickly and defended those decisions loudly, and the man who had decided loudest was Sheriff Doyle. Victor Doyle, in his dark coat with the polished brass buttons, standing at the edge of the square now with his cold, pale blue eyes fixed on her like she was a problem he was finally solving. He had a politician's smile. He used it now, briefly, for the benefit of the men nearest him, and then let it fall. The rope was hemp, rough as a briar. It sat against the side of her throat, and she felt every fibre of it. She thought of her daughter, Clara, 7 years old, and already at the Harmon Ranch 2 miles out, already being told her mother was a monster. She thought of the jar of foxglove tincture that had appeared in her kitchen one morning, placed on the windowsill without explanation. She had thrown it out. She had told no one. She understood now what that had cost her. The crowd shifted. A murmur ran through it, like a ripple across still water. A rider had come down the main street at a walk, unhurried, as if he had nowhere pressing to be, and the town's business was no concern of his, except that he had stopped. He sat his horse directly in front of the wagon, between Maren and the knot of men nearest the drop lever, and he had not drawn his gun yet, but his right hand rested on his thigh in a way that made the nearest deputy take a single step back, without appearing to intend it. He was broad-shouldered under a trail duster, and the faded blue shirt beneath it had been road-worn for what looked like weeks. His hair was dark brown, gone silver at the temples, pushed back beneath a hat that had seen hard weather. His eyes, when he looked up at her, were pale grey and very still. She had never seen him before in her life. He said nothing to her. He looked at Doyle. "What's the charge?" His voice was low and flat, the kind of voice that did not perform itself. Doyle's expression did not change. "Murder, settled by a jury of this county." "What county?" A pause, shorter than it should have been. "Harlan County," someone said from the crowd, and then caught themselves, because the county's name had changed 2 years prior when the territorial lines shifted, and the man they had said it to seemed to know that. The rider looked at the rope. He looked at Maren. He looked back at Doyle. "She'll come down," he said. "Now." Maren had not allowed herself to believe it. Not yet. She stood on the back of the wagon and watched the stranger face down Victor Doyle in the hard morning light, and she told herself it was not finished, that Doyle had 4 deputies, and that a single rider with a pale gaze and a quiet voice was not sufficient cause for hope. She had been wrong about people before. She had been wrong about Edmund. She had been wrong about this town. But Doyle did not draw. That surprised her more than the stranger's arrival. She had watched Doyle face down a cattle drover 3 months ago over a matter of $10, and he had drawn then without hesitation and fired into the man's shoulder just to be sure the lesson took. He was not a cautious man. He was not a man who chose restraint by preference. He chose it now. "You have no standing here," Doyle said. The smile was gone. His cold, pale eyes moved over the stranger with a calculation she recognized. He was counting something: odds, witnesses, consequences. This is a settled matter. Then you'll have paperwork, the stranger said, signed by a proper territorial judge, with a date on it no older than 60 days. Another pause. Longer. We don't need your kind of paperwork in Caldwell Flat. No, the rider said, and his hand moved, slow, deliberate, not to his holster, but to his coat's inner pocket, from which he produced a folded document and held it at arm's length without dismounting. You need this kind. No one in the crowd could read it from where they stood. That wasn't the point. The point was, the paper existed, and Doyle had gone very still. Deputy Marshal, someone behind Maren whispered. She felt it move through the crowd, the way a cold wind moves through a wheat field. Not loud, but universal. She did not know if it was true. She did not care. She watched Doyle's jaw set, and then unlock. Watched the calculation finish, and then one of the deputies climbed up on the wagon behind her, and she braced herself for the feel of rough hands. But he only cut the rope at the post and stepped back, and the noose went slack around her neck. She did not let her knees buckle. She would not let them see that either. His name was Harlan Petch. He told her that an hour later, in the shade behind the feed store, out of sight of the street. He had given her water and a piece of salt bread from his saddlebag, and she had eaten it standing up because sitting down felt like surrender. "Are you actually a deputy marshal?" she said. It was not exactly a question. He looked at her steadily. "That paper has Marshal Garrett's seal on it. Garrett owes me a considerable favor." "That's not what I asked." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I rode for the marshals 3 years. I ride alone now." "Then you had no lawful authority to stop that hanging." "No," he said. "I had a gun, and Doyle is a coward, and neither of those things is lawful authority. But here you are." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. His pale grey eyes were steady and unhurried, and she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that he was not asking for gratitude. He was simply there, waiting to see what she needed, prepared to provide it if he could, and honest enough not to pretend if he couldn't. She had not encountered that combination in a man in some time. "I have a daughter," she said. "She's at the Harmon Ranch." "I know," she frowned. "You've been here before." 2 days, he said. "I heard what happened to your husband. I heard the story from the stockyard." The story was thin. She set down the bread and looked at her hands. The rope had left a mark along her throat, faint but present, and she could still feel the scratch of it against her pulse. She thought of the foxglove tincture. She thought of the kitchen window where it had been placed, and who would have had cause to enter the store by the rear door before Edmund died. "Doyle put it there," she said. It was not a thing she had said aloud before. Harlan said nothing. He waited. Edmund knew something about Doyle, about the land claims north of the creek. Edmund kept ledgers, careful ones with dates. He was going to send them to the Territorial Land Office. She paused. He told Doyle that. He told him face to face. I was in the next room. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man absorbing information and beginning to understand a larger shape. "Where are the ledgers?" he said. "Buried under the floorboard in the store's back room. Edmund built the board himself. I don't think Doyle knows about it." "He knows about it," Harlan said. "He just hasn't gotten to it yet. He was occupied." He looked at her steadily. "We need those ledgers." She nodded once. She had known that. She had known it since the morning they came for her, and she had been trying to stay alive long enough to do something about it. "The store is locked," she said. "Doyle will have posted someone." "Likely," he said, and stood and checked the angle of the sun. "Tonight, then." The afternoon passed with a heaviness particular to frontier summer, the kind that presses down on the shoulders and makes shadows seem darker than they are. Harlan had found a room for her in a boarding house, run by a woman named Preetha Alcott, who had watched the hanging attempt from her window and had said nothing to Maren when she arrived, but had given her a basin of warm water and a clean cloth, and closed the door behind her without asking questions. Maren had washed the rope mark from her throat and sat on the edge of the bed for a while, not sleeping, listening to the sounds of the town below. She thought about Clara, about the way her daughter's hair curled at the back of her neck, and how she had a habit of pressing her small hands flat against any table or fence post she passed, as if testing the world for solidity. Clara was afraid of sudden loud noises and unafraid of horses, which was the right balance for a girl growing up in this part of the country. She had Edmund's dark eyes, not Maren's storm-grey ones. She would not remember her father much, in another year or two. That was its own kind of grief. She would remember her mother. Maren had to make sure that was not a memory she'd carry in the shape of a hanging. She lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the plank ceiling and made herself think clearly. The ledgers existed. Doyle wanted them. Without them, he could simply reframe the situation, claim she'd escaped the sentence, have his deputies bring her back in, and finish the matter quietly. With them, the land fraud could be exposed to the territorial office, and Doyle's authority in Caldwell Flat would crack at its foundations. The ledgers were the only thing that mattered. Everything else was consequence. She was still thinking when the knock came at the door, not Harlan's knock, which she had already registered as a particular double tap, 2 knuckles, deliberate, but a lighter, faster knock, and the door opened before she could answer it, and a girl slipped through it and stopped in the middle of the room with her small hands pressed flat against her skirt and her dark eyes wide. Maren was on her feet before she understood what she was doing. Clara did not run. She walked forward carefully, precisely, the way she did when she was holding very hard onto something inside herself. She reached her mother and pressed her face into Maren's midsection and stood there without making a sound. Maren held her with both arms and looked over her daughter's head at the doorway. Harlan stood there. He had ridden to the Harmon ranch. He had not told her he was going to do that. He simply had. She said nothing. There was nothing adequate to say. He nodded once, pulled the door mostly closed, and left them to it. They went for the ledgers near midnight. The town was quiet by then. The saloon on the far end of the street, still showing lamplight and muted sound, but the main square dark and still. Maren led, and Harlan followed 3 steps behind, which was the arrangement she had suggested, and he had accepted without protest. She knew the store's back alley better than he did. She knew which board on the rear gate creaked, and which did not, which direction it opened, where the latch sat in its bracket. She had lived in this store for 3 years. She had swept its floors and counted its inventory and managed its accounts. She had loved it, in the quiet way that practical people love the places they have built a life in. She did not think about that now. A single deputy sat on a barrel outside the front door. They could see him from the alley entrance. Young, bored, his hat tipped forward and his head low, probably dozing. She did not need to tell Harlan to be quiet. The back door yielded to her without sound. Inside, the store smelled of dried corn and old wood and the faint trace of lamp oil. She moved through it from memory, past the counter, past the shelves, to the back room where Edmund had built the storage floor. She knelt and found the edge of the loose board without a lamp, running her fingers along the seam until it gave. The tin box was where she had left it. She lifted it out with both hands and set it on her knees. She felt, suddenly, the full weight of the last 4 days. The arrest, the cell, the cold morning, the rope, the stranger who had ridden in from nowhere with a document of uncertain legitimacy, and a stillness that had somehow unmade Victor Doyle in front of his own people. She felt it all land on her at once, not as despair, but as something more complicated, as the particular, near-physical sensation of realizing you are still alive when you had stopped expecting to be. She took one breath. She took the box. They were nearly to the alley gate when the lantern opened. It came from the side, from the narrow gap between the store and the cooperage next door, and the light spread sudden and wide, and in it stood two men, not deputies, something else, in rougher clothes, the kind of men Doyle employed when he wanted work done outside the ledger of official duties. One held the lantern, and one held a rifle, and both of them looked at Maren and Harlan with the deliberate calm of people who had been waiting for exactly this. "Box," the rifleman said. One word, a man who did not think a woman required more instruction than that. Maren did not move. She was aware of Harlan to her right and slightly behind, aware of the angle of the rifle, aware that the alley was narrow enough that the two men could not both move at once without interfering with each other. She had thought about this, in the abstract, since the conversation about the ledgers. She had thought about what she would do if it came to this. She threw the tin box to her left, hard, and it struck the base of the copperage wall with a sound like a gunshot, and both men's eyes went to it. Not long, a fraction of a second, but sufficient. Harlan moved. He was not a man who moved with violence or drama. He moved like a person who understood leverage, and the rifleman went sideways into the alley wall with a sound of expelled breath, and the rifle hit the dirt, and Harlan's knee was already on the man's wrist, and the lantern holder was backing up with both hands wide and empty. "No call for this," the lantern holder said. His voice had lost its steadiness. "Go," Harlan said. The man went. Maren had already retrieved the box from the dirt. She tucked it under her arm and looked at the rifleman, who was sitting against the wall with one hand pressed to his face and his eyes unfocused. And then she looked at Harlan, who was straightening his duster and picking up his hat. "We need to move," she said. "Yes," he said. They did. By dawn, Maren's statement and the contents of the ledger had been dispatched by telegram rider to the Territorial Land Office and to the Circuit Judge's office in Dunmore, 80 miles south. The telegram had been sent by Pritha Alcott, who had relations at the telegraph depot and did not care for Victor Doyle, and had a very long memory for certain events that had happened to a woman she knew 4 winters past in similar circumstances. Harlan had spent the hours before dawn reading the ledger by candlelight and writing a summary in his own hand, concise and precise, the hand of a man accustomed to reports and depositions. He set it beside the original pages and did not comment on what was in it beyond what was necessary. What was in it was considerable. The land north of Caldwell Creek had been claimed under fraudulent filings, filed under the names of men who were either dead or who had never set foot in the territory. The money from those claims, fees, rents, leases, had moved through 3 accounts to a bank in Dunmore, and then, more quietly, elsewhere. Victor Doyle's name did not appear once in the ledger. Edmund Vail had understood the way such things were arranged. The names in the ledger were proxies, but the dates aligned, the access aligned, the transfers aligned. Edmund had been meticulous. He had also been, in most other ways, a difficult man to love. Maren held no illusions about that. He had not been cruel exactly, but he had been absent in the ways that mattered, and the store had been his world, and she had been an efficient part of it, and she had accepted that arrangement because it was safe, and because she had needed something safe after the years before it. She did not grieve him the way she grieved the version of their life she had tried to build. She grieved that quietly. She kept it separate from everything else. Clara had slept through the night on the boarding-house bed, one hand curled under her chin. Maren had looked at her daughter's face in the grey early light, and thought that whatever came next, whatever the territorial judge decided or failed to decide, she would not put the noose around Clara's childhood. She would find a way forward that did not require her daughter to carry the weight of this town. Doyle came for her himself at mid-morning. She had expected it. She was standing outside the boarding-house when he arrived, which was her deliberate choice. She would not be found. She would be where he could see her, in the public street, where the town could see her too. He came with 2 deputies, which was fewer than she expected. He was dressed in his usual dark coat with the polished brass buttons, and his cold, pale blue eyes moved over her without expression. "You're still in my town," he said. "I'm in a public street," she said. "In a territory with laws. The sentence isn't stayed. It's deferred. The circuit judge in Dunmore has received the ledger and your land records," she said, keeping her voice even. "He received them this morning by the earliest rider. He has also received a sworn account of the conduct of your jury selection and of the evidence withheld at trial. This is now a territorial matter, Sheriff Doyle, not a county matter." The silence that followed was different from the one in the square the morning before. That silence had been the town watching a confrontation between known forces. This one was the particular silence of people watching a man realize that the ground beneath him has changed while he was standing on it. Doyle's pale eyes moved past her. Harlan stood at the mouth of the alley to her left. He was not pointing a gun. His right hand rested on his thigh in the same position it had occupied the morning before. He did not need to do more than stand there. The deputies exchanged a look. Doyle felt it. He was a man who had built his power on reading crowds, and the deputies were the smallest possible version of a crowd, but they were enough. He left. He walked back the way he came, steadily, not quickly, preserving the appearance of a man who had made a choice rather than been driven off. But he left. His deputies followed, and the street let out a long, collective breath, and somewhere above and behind her, Maren heard the boarding-house window open. She turned. Pritha Alcott looked down at her from the second floor, and then, without expression, she closed the shutters. Maren found Harlan at the livery stable that afternoon. He was saddling his horse, which was a dark roan with a calm eye and an air of professional patience. His saddlebags were full. His hat was settled down rather than pushed back, which she had already noticed was the difference between him at rest and him in motion. She stood in the stable entrance and watched him work. "You're leaving," she said. "Road south is safer now than it was yesterday." She considered that. It was true. With the telegram sent and the circuit judge's office engaged, Doyle's practical options had narrowed considerably. The violence he could bring to bear was circumscribed by the same concern for witnesses and records that had stopped him in the square. Harlan Petch's presence in Caldwell Flat had served its purpose. "Where are you going?" she said. He checked the cinch and straightened, and turned to look at her. The pale grey eyes were steady and unhurried, as they had been from the first moment she had seen them, looking up at her from the base of the wagon. She thought of the way he had gone to get Clara without telling her. She thought of the way he had read the ledger, careful and precise, making a record. "South," he said. "For now." She nodded. She put her hands in the front of her too big blouse and looked at the floor of the stable, which was clean straw and packed dirt. A horse in the next stall shifted its weight and blew softly. "I have the store," she said, "and the land claim dispute will settle in my favor. The circuit judge will see to that. Clara and I can live. I can manage the store alone." She paused. "I've been managing it alone for 4 years. It just had Edmund's name on the sign." Harlan said nothing. He waited, which was a thing he did well. "I want to take the sign down," she said. "Put my name on it." "That's a good thing to do." "It is," she said, and looked up at him. "I'm telling you because you're the only person in this town who has not expressed an opinion about what I should do next, and I find I've wanted to tell someone." Something shifted in his face. Not much, but enough. The stillness in his eyes read differently in that moment. Safe, she had labelled it in her mind, from the very first. Not dangerous, but safe. "Maren Vail's general store," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. His hand was off the saddle. He was not quite ready to leave. "There are things south that need doing," he said, "but they aren't fixed with a date." She said nothing. She waited, because she had learned from him that waiting was sometimes the most powerful thing a person could offer. "I'll be through Caldwell Flat again," he said. "In a month, maybe 6 weeks." "The road comes through here or around it," she said. "You'd have to choose to come through." "Yes," he said. She nodded once. She held out her hand, and he took it, a firm, brief clasp, the kind that meant something in a world where words were expensive. His hand was calloused and dry and steady. She let go first. She turned and walked back out into the sunlight, past the livery gate, into the hard, bright morning. The dust rose around her boots as she went. Behind her she heard the roan shift and stamp and the creak of leather as Harlan mounted. She did not look back, but she listened until the hoofbeats moved south and the sound of them faded slowly into the wide, open silence of the plain. Clara was waiting at the boarding house, pressing both small hands flat against the porch railing, testing it. Maren walked toward her. The town of Caldwell Flat stretched out around her on all sides, its dusty streets and its shuttered windows and its people who would have to decide now what they owed her. The sign above the store still had Edmund's name on it. She would take it down tomorrow, and she would put her own up in its place, and she would open the door, and the long, plain work of building a life that belonged to her would begin. She had been left to hang. She was still here. That was enough to start with. More than enough. She reached the porch, and Clara turned, and the girl's dark eyes were steady and unafraid, and Maren put her hand on her daughter's shoulder and felt the warmth of her beneath the thin cotton, and the morning opened ahead of them like a road. The dust settles. The danger has passed. But every story leaves something behind, a feeling, a question, a memory. What did this one leave with you? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you are in this world tonight, because these stories travel far, and I want to know every corner they reach. If you felt something, like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story, and subscribe, because the next tale is already waiting in the shadows. I'll see you there.